All right, hi everyone. How's it going? And welcome to another video. Now, I was deciding on what I was going to do my next video on. Then I watched some movies and I knew I had to do a video on this. The movie I watched was Lost Soul: The Doomed Journey of Richard Stanley's Island of Dr. Monroe. Dr. Moreau. And there's the poster of it. But anyway, I watched this documentary and I thought it was very interesting. I know in the past I've done videos about this kind of thing before. I did a video on Jodorowsky's Dune and how Jodorowsky had all these great ideas for Dune. He was going to have Pink Floyd do the soundtrack and he was going to have Salvatore Dali in the movie. Just all these great ideas, but the Hollywood studios didn't really like the work he had done in the past, and they were worried about taking a risk on the project, so the film never got made. But yeah, this is sort of like that, except the film did get made. Now, it's about Richard Stanley's Island of Dr. Moreau. Now, just a little bit on Island of Dr. Moreau. It's an H.G. Wells. It's based on an H.G. Wells novel that came out in 1896. It's been made into movies probably almost as early as they've been making movies. My understanding is there was a recently discovered lost German film of the Island of Dr. Moreau. And there was also another one made, a more famous one, in 1932 that had Bela Lugosi in it. But yeah, that I know that will sometimes be shown, like different horror hosts will sometimes show that. But this one, though, of course, there was another one that I do want to mention, and that was the 1977 one with Burt Lancaster. And that one I did see. I liked that one more than this one I'm going to be talking about, the 1996 one. I thought the 77 one was a bit better. I mean, it was pretty good for the time, for the makeup effects and all that, and how they shot it. It does have a real 70s cinematography kind of feel to it, a lot of times. But, it was well made, I thought. The music was good, and it was well made. There's some shots where they used real animals, like real tigers. I think there was a scene where this like yak man gets into a fight, and it's like a real tiger. And I don't know how they went about filming this, but it seemed pretty elaborate. They had like animal trainers on the set or what, but it really seemed pretty elaborate, some of the things they did with real animals. But yeah, the 1996 Island of Dr. Moreau is considered to be a colossal failure. And so much so that they even made a documentary on how the Island of Dr. Moreau was a colossal failure. And I have to say, and I have to admit, I think this documentary is the best thing I've ever seen or read on the Island of Dr. Moreau. I have read the H.G. Wells novel as well, and I wasn't really too big into it. I know it's near and dear to a lot of people. Some people really like it. I didn't really care for it. I found it very difficult to read, actually. And then, there's movies, and, you could even go and probably find some plot synopsis and really get a better grasp of what's going on. But this Island of Lost Soul, in my opinion, Lost Soul: The Doomed Journey of Richard Stanley's Island of Dr. Moreau, is probably the best thing to come out on the Island of Dr. Moreau. It's a good documentary. Richard Stanley was and is a filmmaker who is from South Africa originally. My understanding is he's a direct descendant of Henry Stanley, the African explorer who is most famous for an incident where he went into the jungle and found David Livingston and then uttered the quote, Dr. Livingston, I presume. So supposedly Richard Stanley's a direct descendant of this African explorer. And, he became a filmmaker. He has an interesting story in and of himself. I mean, an interesting story of the things he's done and just the things he's interested in and just his upbringing. I mean, I listened to some of this guy's interviews, and they are interesting. I mean, he talks about growing up in South Africa and seeing a herd of giraffe just run by, and he talks about how it had become passé. Kind of passé to see a herd of giraffe just run by you. So, but he talks about like getting into filmmaking. First, he was doing videos. Then he followed a guy to Afghanistan when the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan was going on. And apparently, he was like a journalist in that. He was writing stuff. But yeah, so, he's had a lot of interesting experiences. And he's interesting to listen, to this guy talk. But became a filmmaker, did a couple movies before he was to do this Island of Dr. Moreau thing. He had done Hardware. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Hardware. It's a horror movie basically about this like killer android. And it takes place in a post-apocalyptic setting. I thought he really nailed the post-apocalyptic setting. Plus, if you like punk or metal, it has Lemmy and Iggy Pop in it. But yeah, anyways, he made that movie Hardware. Then he made another movie after that called Dust Devil. That I can't speak on. I haven't seen, but I know he was trying to make a movie that would be good for a cheap price, because he definitely had a budget when he was making these films. And if I understand correctly, some point he worked with Harvey Weinstein on something, and he did an interview about a year before that whole scandal broke with Harvey Weinstein, where he said that, yeah, news about Harvey Weinstein is going to break pretty shortly. He has a bit of a Bill Cosby situation going on. And then, I think a year after he said this, um, that whole thing happened, with Harvey Weinstein and all that. But yeah, anyways, getting back to this, he was going to be on this project because I guess the people at, once it was New Line Cinema, had liked his work. They were going to have Richard Stanley direct this film. And right from the get-go, in directing this film and making it, it was a disaster. I mean, a lot of people were put on the project and they were fired. They were going to have Bruce Willis be in this Island of Dr. Moreau. Bruce Willis, probably the biggest actor in Hollywood at that time, 96. He was at least one of them. But he couldn't do it because he was getting divorced from Demi Moore at the time, and he was unable to commit to the project. So they ended up getting Val Kilmer, who was probably also, one of the biggest in Hollywood at the time. I mean, Val Kilmer was pretty famous at that time. He had done some movies. He had just recently done the Batman movie he did. So Val Kilmer was pretty big. He had done the Doors movie. I mean, my favorite movie with Val Kilmer, and it has to be the Doors movie that he did. I mean, he nailed that part of Jim Morrison. I mean, he really did. It's been said he played that part so well and really became Jim Morrison so much that he actually had to go seek out therapy to kind of get the Jim Morrison out of his head, because he really kind of became that character. It's like a good method actor. So they're going to have Val Kilmer do it. They're also going to have Marlon Brando do it as well. Marlon Brando was going to play Dr. Moreau. And Val Kilmer was going to play one of the lead characters, but then he didn't want to. He committed to a minor character, the character of Montgomery, I believe it was, because my understanding is, Val Kilmer was given divorce papers while this movie was going on, and he didn't really feel like fully committing to the project at this time. And he was very difficult to work with. Everyone talks about how difficult Val Kilmer was to work with on this. And one of the guys in the documentary even refers to him as like a prep school bully, that he was just very difficult to work with in making this film. And Marlon Brando, although he was more respectful to everyone involved in the film than Val Kilmer was, Marlon Brando was difficult as well because he developed this rivalry with Val Kilmer, and he had some ideas, and some of the ideas Marlon Brando had weren't that great. I mean, I know there was one of it where he wanted Moreau to wear this like bucket thing on his head because, it would be like, okay, here's Moreau. He's kind of like the Pope of this island, and, has almost a religious significance about him for the work he has done. So he's going to wear this big bucket like Pope hat. And then Marlon Brando said that he wanted, at the end of the movie, he wanted to have Moreau take off this big bucket hat and it would reveal that he's really a dolphin. So that I was laughing pretty loud at that point. I mean, I thought that was funny. Like, it's coming up with these ideas that just weren't good. They weren't in the script. They weren't in the source material. It was just coming up with things, and a lot of that kind of happened. Anyways, Richard Stanley is on the film, and he was not directing the film for too long. And then he got fired 4 days into making the film. At one point, he was really frustrated with how they were kind of butchering his ideas in the script, that I guess he climbed up a tree and he refused to get down. And there was just a lot of like arguing he was having with people because they were deviating from what he wanted. He felt that they never really captured the essence of the novel on film, and he wanted to be the one to do that. This was his passion project, and he got fired from his passion project. So and then he got fired from his passion project, and they brought in another director, an individual by the name of John Frankenheimer, who had been in Hollywood a long time and directed a lot of movies, and he was going to make this movie. And I don't know how he felt about the source material or anything like that, but he had been directing movies so long, I knew what he had to do, and he was famous for being able to get difficult to work with actors to cooperate. So, like I said, Val Kilmer was known as being difficult to work with, and there was a lot of back and forth between Val Kilmer and Marlon Brando. And the documentary gets into all that. Like, there was this like standoff thing they had where one wouldn't come out of his trailer unless the other came out of his trailer. I mean, just all this like stuff like that they were doing to one another, making it very difficult to make this movie. There was also a man, I can't think of his name offhand, but he was known as the world's smallest man at the time. And Marlon Brando wanted him in the movie, so he was in the movie as well. So he was the world's smallest man at the time. So yeah, very interesting documentary. And also, if I remember, you had I think her last name was Bulk, and I know she had done a few movies. She was in The Craft. She was in The Water Boy. She was into Return to Oz. I remember seeing Return to Oz when I was a little kid. I remember finding it kind of freaky and kind of cool at the same time. I'd like to see that one again, Return to Oz. But yeah, she was also in Almost Famous, which is a movie I like a lot. But she was in this film as well, and she talks about this whole movie being a disaster as well. And she also talks about how she didn't like the fact that Richard Stanley got fired. Because when Richard Stanley got fired, some actors did leave because they wanted to make this movie with Richard Stanley. One of the actors, I think Marlowe was the last name, or Merlot. He was on the show Northern Exposure, and he was supposed to be in the movie, but he left because Richard Stanley wasn't going to be making the movie. So they gave Richard Stanley this plane ticket, told him to go home. Instead of going home, Richard Stanley runs into the jungle of the movie was made in Australia. So he runs into these Australian jungles and is living on some guy's plantation, from what I understand, or some kind of farm. And eventually, I think it's like a couple months later, even, the crew discovers him. Now, I don't know if they said Stanley, I presume, or not. that would be weird. But the crew discovers Richard Stanley in the jungle, and one of the makeup designer on the set, the guy who's putting people in the animal costumes, agrees to put Richard Stanley in this like dogman costume. So Richard Stanley goes back onto the set in this like dogman costume and plays an extra. Now, that I had heard of. That part I had heard of. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to watch this, because I had heard of that incident before. It's one of those things, excuse me. It's one of those things you hear about from time to time. One of those like famous Hollywood legends. I always kind of wanted to know the full backstory of that. It always seemed very strange to me. Anyways, he's now playing this dog man. He's back in the movie, and they're making the film. They're worried that maybe Richard Stanley might do something to sabotage the set because he was really mad that he wasn't making the film. Eventually, they end up making the film. They finish it, and from my understanding, I know a lot of people didn't like it. A lot of people thought it was a terrible film. And I think it's difficult source material myself to try to make into a good movie. I mean, I really think it is. And I did like the costumes. I mean, I don't believe there was really much, if any, CGI in this film. I don't think they really did the CGI thing. I don't think there was a whole lot of that in 96. I mean, there was some, but I don't know that there was a whole lot at that time. And just didn't look like it had that. So the costumes look pretty cool for the most part. The costumes look pretty cool. It's just the movie really kind of fell apart and didn't work out that well. Like I said, I like the 1977 one with Burt Lancaster a lot more. But yeah, this documentary on it I like better than anything related to the Island of Dr. Moreau. This documentary was good, because it shows what could happen in filmmaking, and it also shows that of the arts that you have, whether it be painting, drawing, writing, music, of the arts, filmmaking could very well be one of the more logistically complex forms of art. I mean, I think so. Filmmaking has got to be a pretty logistically complex form of art, and you definitely see that in this documentary. But overall, thought it was a good documentary. And another reason why I wanted to watch this is because I recently saw The Color Out of Space, which is a Lovecraftian film. Now, Lovecraft is my favorite fiction writer, so I wanted to see that. I definitely wanted to see it with Nicolas Cage. And again, Richard Stanley's taken on a difficult project. Lovecraft is very difficult to convert from, the books to a movie. Lovecraft is historically very difficult to do that with. I mean, it's very hard to do that with Lovecraft material. Stephen King And a lot of Stephen King's success, I believe, has been due to the fact that it's been his books have translated into movies for the most part pretty well. With Lovecraft, that's not the case. But I do kind of want to go back and watch some of those old, like Reanimator and that. I haven't seen that in a long time. So I do kind of want to watch what I say because I do want to go back and see some of the Lovecraft influenced movies that I haven't seen in a long time. But yeah, just a good documentary to see like how films are made and just what a debacle this whole thing was. Richard Stanley said another interesting thing that I do want to mention before I end this video, and that's that he felt that the movie was rated R and the movie was $75 million to make, and you shouldn't go above $25 million with an R-rated movie. That's usually something you wouldn't want to do. Although he says that he didn't know that at the time, but he does say that as kind of like a cautionary tale. I never knew that. I thought that was pretty interesting that he mentioned that. But yeah, like I said, just a interesting documentary, definitely worth checking out. If you've watched this video, as always, I thank you for watching. Have a good night and stay safe.